If there was ever a perfect candidate to become a spirit, writer Edgar Allan Poe might just be the one. Fascinated both with the afterlife and the nature of death, Poe's obsessions found expression in the macabre, in his classic renderings of the American Gothic, in Fall of the House of Usher, and The Raven. Interest in the spiritual came at to Poe at an early age. Already abandoned by his father, he was not quite 3 years old when his mother, Elizabeth Arnold Poe, died in Richmond, Virginia, from tuberculosis. While Edgar had been born in the cosmopolitan world that was Boston, it was in genteel Richmond that he found a home for both his heart and his weary soul. Care of Edgar fell to his godparents, the Allens in Richmond. Poe took his adopted family's surname, and an immortal triumvirate of names was born. While the Allens did what they could for young Poe, he never completely recovered from the loss of his mother. He wrestled with depression throughout his life, and was forever haunted by the specter of death and the afterlife. His spirit is said to be in Richmond still, haunting Talavera, a home he visited before his death. The Allens shuttled in and out of homes around Richmond, and then traveled to Europe, where Edgar was educated in schools in England and Scotland. When they returned to Richmond, they settled in Moldavia, Poe's last home in Richmond, where he lived until he began studies at the University of Virginia. Across the street from the Allens lived the Roysters with their daughter, Elmira. A romance blossomed between the two youngsters, but any hopes for the budding romance were crushed under the weight of Elmira's parents' disapproval of Poe. Poe never forgot Elmira, and it was to her he would later return. Soon after entering the University of Virginia, Poe left both the university and the state. Though he had shown an aptitude in the classical and Romance languages at university, he left school after a quarrel about his gambling debts with his adoptive father, John Allen. Poe headed north to the city of his birth, Boston. Without support from his wealthy parents and with no steady income of his own, Poe soon fell into poverty and was forced to join the army. While enlisted, he completed work on a volume of verse he had begun while in Richmond. Published in 1827, Tamerlane and other poems chronicled his split with the Allens. Poe did recounsel with John Allen, albeit half-heartedly, as a favor to his dying adoptive mother. With a reconciliation and subsequent financial support, Poe was able to leave the army. He was granted an honorable discharge and soon after resumed studies at West Point. Allen's remarriage, though, severed any support Poe might once have had. Without his father's influence to lobby on his behalf, Edgar was expelled from West Point for numerous infractions. In 1829 and 1831, Poe offered two more volumes of poetry. None of these three volumes garnered much attention or acclaim, and a defeated Poe went to live with his aunt, Maria Clem, and her daughter, Virginia, in Baltimore. Poe found his creative spirit revived here and began writing again in earnest, composing a number of short stories and winning a literary contest with his story MS Found in a Bottle. His work attracted the attention of J.P. Kennedy, who helped Poe become the editor of the Southern Literary Messenger in Richmond. With this job, the prodigal son had returned home, but it wouldn't last. Poe found refuge from his depression and found it often in alcohol. While his work was exemplary and insightful, drinking cost Poe his job. In 1836, Poe married his cousin, Virginia Clem, who was 13 years old. With his child bride in tow, Poe headed north once again in 1837, this time to New York City, bolstered by both his wife and his hopes of owning his own literary publication. Poe failed in creating his own magazine, but found work in Philadelphia editing Burton's Gentleman's Magazine and Graham's Magazine. By 1844, Poe was confident enough to try his hand again in New York City, and found success there working for the Evening Mirror and the Broadway Journal. The Raven and other poems came out a year later, a volume of poetry that announced the arrival of a bold writing voice with the force and power of a clarion call. But while Poe was meeting with success in his work, His private life continued to be tinged by loss and tragedy. In 1847, Poe's wife died. She was 24 at the time, the same age his mother had been when she died. Poe, already disturbed by death and the macabre, was devastated by the loss of his wife. Only 38, but victimized by the death of two beloved women in his life, Poe examined his own mortality. He began wandering late into the night. Worried friends often found the distressed rider at Virginia's grave, weeping and wailing. Virginia's death spurred him to return to Richmond briefly in 1848 and again in 1849. In Richmond, Poe revived his relationship with his forbidden childhood sweetheart, the former Elmira Royster. She had married a Mr. Shelton, but like Poe, had lost her spouse unexpectedly. Poe reached out from the darkness of his soul and found the hand of Elmira ready and willing to lead him into the light. For once, Poe was able to give up drugs and alcohol. The two found an affinity, leading to a time Poe would call the happiest he had known for years. He spoke optimistically about the future, flushed with love for Elmira and basking in the glow of his spreading fame and acclaim. In September 1849, Poe gave a reading at the Exchange Hotel with 300 guests, each paying $5 to hear the writer himself present works such as The Raven. The $1,500 he received would be the most money he had ever had in his possession at one time. On September 25th, Poe made his way to Talavera at 2315 West Gray Street, home of the Tolly family. By all accounts, he passed the evening in high spirits, and was even coaxed into reading The Raven once again. No one could have known it would be the last reading Poe would ever give. Despite his earlier optimism, when Poe left Talavera, his mood had changed markedly. Legend states that as Poe turned to bid farewell to his host, he lifted his hat. At the exact moment, a meteor arced its way across the sky, directly over his head, and vanished in the east. Poe saw the celestial object as an omen. Due to leave for the north once again in order to bring his former mother-in-law and aunt, Maria Clem, south for his wedding to Elmira, Poe told his fiancée before leaving that he felt that he would never see her again. Poe was supposed to be away for only 2 weeks, but his fears proved to be grounded. He would never again return to Richmond. Less than 2 weeks later, Edgar Allan Poe would be dead. The circumstances surrounding his death are mysterious, clouded by speculation. What is known is that Poe left Richmond without any luggage. His bags were packed and left behind at his residence, the Swan Tavern. In the early hours of the morning before his train to Baltimore, he awoke a local shopkeeper to have a pair of boots repaired. He then boarded his train and was gone. Those who saw him would later recall that all seemed fine, that while Poe appeared in good spirits, he was decidedly not drunk on them. In Baltimore, Poe was invited to a party. There he was offered a drink. His host, apparently unaware that Poe had struggled for years with alcohol abuse and that he had managed to become sober. Why Poe accepted the drink isn't exactly clear. Some, like Virginia's ghostwriter L.B. Taylor Jr., speculate that he didn't want to risk offending his gracious host. The drink ignited something deep within the heart of Poe, his resolve not to drink giving way. Poe vanished for 5 days, resurfacing in Baltimore barroom, where he was found unconscious in an armchair. Some suspect that Poe had a complete relapse and tumbled fully and completely into alcohol, allowing himself every indulgence on a 5-day bender. He was dirty, his clothes tattered, his face unkempt. The 1500 he had earned from speaking at the Exchange Hotel was gone. He was rushed to hospital where doctors determined that he was suffering from extreme dehydration. The membranes in his brain were swollen and inflamed, a condition the doctors diagnosed as a violent brain fever. By this point, there was little that could be done. Edgar Allan Poe died on October 7th, 1849. Yet even in death, Poe would not find the quiet he seemed to crave so desperately. A cousin commissioned a headstone for Poe's grave, but on the day that it was to be erected in Westminster Cemetery in Baltimore, an accident involving a freight train resulted in the destruction of the tombstone. Instead, Poe's final resting place was marked with a sandstone lot marker inscribed with the number 80. Or was it his final resting place? It seemed that both the marker and the body were not buried where they should have been, not placed in their proper plots until 1875. Surrounded in death as he was by the ineptness of his living, Poe was unable to find eternal rest. It's said that he haunts Talavera, the last standing home in Richmond he is believed to have visited. In 1975, a group bought the home with plans to renovate it. Residents who have lived within its halls claim the building is haunted. L.B. Taylor Jr. reports that one former resident was painting his apartment when he heard footsteps in the front foyer. When he went to greet his unexpected visitor, he discovered that he was alone. Another answered the door for two friends and could not have been more surprised when one of them remarked that there was a ghost standing behind him. The specter was described as that of a friendly man with dark eyes and dark hair. Still another believed that something would climb into bed with him, that while he couldn't see who or what it was, the pillow next to him would clearly depress beneath the head of the spirit. Then there are the usual reports of cold spots throughout the home, of dogs loathing the home. If it is indeed the spirit of Poe who continues to walk the storied halls of Talavera, then one can only hope that he has found happiness. After all, he has returned to Richmond, the one place where he was able to escape, if for just a brief time, the ghosts of his past.